Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are taking a massive, truly fascinating journey through a sprawling 600-year history that fundamentally shaped the modern world. We're talking about the Ottoman Empire. For anyone looking to truly understand the roots of today's global dynamics, this is absolutely essential. I mean, this wasn't just a kingdom. It was an incredible, dynamic force that lasted for centuries, literally transforming everything it touched. By tracking their incredible history, we can draw direct lines from ancient imperial decrees straight to today's modern maps.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We'll start with empire's rapid rise from 1299. Then we're going to examine its period of stagnation, the frantic Tanzimat Riera reforms, and finally, the empire's lasting legacy that still echoes today.
So, why are we unpacking all of this today? Well, if you've ever looked at the borders, the conflicts, or the amazing cultural intersections in the Middle East and the Balkans and wondered how did it get to be this way, the answer almost always requires looking backward to the Ottomans. Their centuries of rule laid the very foundation of modern geopolitics in these regions. You simply cannot understand the present without understanding this past. Section 1. Rise of the Ottomans, spanning 1299 to 1453. Let's move to this and see how it all builds, starting with their early aggressive expansion. You know, almost everything starts small. Back in 1299, Osman I founded this tiny principality in Anatolia, but man did it grow. Through brilliant warfare and really strategic alliances, they aggressively expanded. By 1453, the leaders like Murad I and Bayezid I, they achieved the unthinkable, conquering Constantinople and cementing a massive empire. They were completely pragmatic, dominating both Christian and Muslim states alike to secure a critical foothold in Europe and the Balkans. During their golden age, these guys were essentially the gatekeepers of global trade. We're talking total control over the flow of everything from spices to silk across the Mediterranean. But, it wasn't just commerce. They completely revolutionized architecture with stunning, gravity-defying landmarks like the Suleiman Mosque in Istanbul. They also made massive advancements in arts and literature. They weren't just conquering the world, they were redesigning it. But, of course, empires rarely maintain their peak forever. Section 2, stagnation and European pressure, spanning the 17th and 18th centuries. The contrast here is just stark. Think about it. The early empire was fiercely self-reliant, constantly expanding, totally dominating Mediterranean commerce. But fast forward to the 17th and 18th centuries, and the cracks really start to show. Global trade routes shifted, entirely bypassing Ottoman ports and bleeding them dry economically. Militarily, they were suddenly outgunned by advancing European navies, and internally, rampant corruption created this creeping bureaucratic stagnation that basically paralyzed the state. And as you might guess, that internal weakness was basically blood in the water. Regional powers, specifically Russia and Austria, seized the opportunity, asserting and increasing their dominance directly over vulnerable Ottoman territory. The geopolitical scales had officially undeniably tipped. Realizing they were completely losing their grip, the empire tried to pivot, but their 18th century efforts were essentially band-aids on a gaping wound. They tried copying Western military tactics and rolling out these partial administrative updates, but because they were just half measures, European powers easily pushed past them, mounting intense pressure specifically on the territories in the Balkans. The state was now facing a full-blown existential crisis. This pushes us into Section 3, the Tanzimat era reforms. And spoiler alert, this period is defined by absolute, urgent desperation to modernize. Let's get clear on exactly what this era was. The Tanzimat, running from 1839 to 1876, was this frantic, wholesale reform period. Facing massive territorial losses, the empire attempted to fundamentally change its identity by implementing models of Western governance. The goal? Rapidly modernize all Ottoman institutions to save the state from total collapse. So the crucial point is the sheer scale of these institutional changes. It was staggering. They completely overhauled their military, shifting away from old systems to modern mass conscription to build a massive standing army. They rewrote their legal frameworks, implemented sweeping educational reforms to create a modern citizenry, and finally, they pulled their biggest lever, establishing a formal constitution in 1876. I mean, they were pulling every single lever they had to modernize. But right here, we hit a really dramatic question. Could all these massive Western reforms actually stop the rising tide of nationalism, particularly in the Balkans? Well, the historical answer is that these efforts only partly worked. Despite the new laws and the Constitution, many territories were already too deeply motivated by nationalism and actively sought complete independence. The internal reforms simply couldn't outpace the desire for self-determination.
Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is the geopolitical irony. It's just incredible. To fight back against Russia in the 1853 Crimean War, the Ottoman Empire formed its very first alliance with Britain and France. Think about that for a second. The once feared superpower that used to terrify Europe was now entirely dependent on it to survive. European support literally became the only way the Ottomans could save their remaining borders.
Which brings us full circle to Section 4, the empire's lasting legacy. Because frankly, the Ottoman footprint is undeniably etched into world history. You literally see it in their timeless architecture. You feel it in the deep cultural enrichment born from centuries of dense trade and exchange. From early military glories to fascinating administrative innovations, the Ottomans didn't just pass through history, they completely molded it. So, I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you look at a modern map of the Middle East or the Balkans, look a little closer. Can you trace the invisible borders of the Ottoman legacy? Because long after the empire fell, its centuries-old fingerprints remain, continuing to shape the conflicts, cultures, and borders of our world today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.